Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. Today is June 1. Today we move into a new segment of Old Testament history. We have closed the book on Solomon's reign as king, Solomon's writing of the book of Ecclesiastes, and Solomon's life in general. Now the kingdom has been passed on to his son Rehoboam. And what we're going to start to read about now is what is known as the divided kingdom. Now, up until this time, Israel has been one. It has been a united kingdom under the rule of three kings. First, King Saul for approximately 40 years. Second, King David for approximately 40 years. And third, King Solomon for approximately 40 years. So roughly 120 years of a united kingdom. But with the succession of Rehoboam upon the throne at his father Solomon's death, the kingdom is going to be divided. And we'll start to read today about how all of that transpires. What I want you to notice from a bigger perspective point of view is this. Notice when you think about Solomon's life, how he began with so much personal acclaim, personal prosperity and security given to him by God himself. And then he continued to go on a decline near the end of his life and declined into moral weakness, to idolatry, to falling away really from the allegiance he had once had to God. The same happens to Israel as a nation. Israel had once been prosperous. Israel had once been very secure because of the faithful leadership of leaders like Joshua and those beyond him, some of the judges that had helped them through times of strength. But now Israel too, like their king before them, has started to go into a decline. And we're going to see idolatry become predominant. We're going to see that to be one of the major causes of the division of this kingdom. And so watch for that, how the nation of Israel is deteriorating, drifting farther and farther from God. This civil conflict that's going to go on between Israel and Judah will go on for years. It starts this way. At the death of Solomon, when Rehoboam is now the king, the people come to Rehoboam asking for their freedom from taxation that had been a heavy burden. Now, these people who are asking for this freedom are led by Jeroboam. We were introduced to Jeroboam earlier as one who was lauded by Solomon as one who really took care of the labor force in Israel to a great degree, but later was threatened by Solomon, and so he had fled to Egypt. Now that Jeroboam hears that Solomon has died, he has returned to Israel, and he leads this group of people who are asking for relief from taxation. Rehoboam says, "Why don't you go away for 3 days, and I'll consider it." While he's considering it, he consults first with the elders of Israel who had surrounded his father Solomon. This is a very good move. And these elders who had served Solomon say to him, "Be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, and then they will always be your servants." Sounds like pretty sound advice. Then Rehoboam, however, calls in some of his own contemporaries, some young men with whom he grew up, and they basically advise him just the opposite. They say, "No, you need to show your power. You need to show your strength. You need to let the people know, if you think my father Solomon was tough, wait till you see what I can do," so that they'll always know who's in charge. Well, unfortunately, Rehoboam ignores the wise advice of those who had counseled his father Solomon, and he listens to the foolish advice of his own contemporaries, and he tells the people that he's going to make their burdens yet heavier when they return for his answer in 3 days. Well, the people don't want to hear that, and so they rebel. And under the leadership of Jeroboam, there are 10 of the tribes that move away from Jerusalem into the north. They call themselves Israel. They are from here on known as the 10 tribes of the north, or the 10 tribes of Israel. Only Judah and the small tribe of Benjamin stay behind under the leadership of Rehoboam. So now you have a divided kingdom. The 10 tribes of Israel in the north that are going to be led by King Jeroboam, and the 2 tribes of Judah in the south that are going to continue to be led by King Rehoboam. Now, when this division happens, a civil war almost starts. And the people in Judah, in that area around Jerusalem especially, put together an army, and they're going to go out and attack those that have rebelled against them. And there is a prophet by the name of Shemaiah that stops them, that thwarts this civil war by saying, this is not what God wants. God has said you need to return, go back to your homes, and don't make this worse than it is. And they actually listen to the prophet of God, Shemaiah, and they do exactly what he tells them that God has told them to do. And so now we start to read about this divided kingdom. And we start to see, even in our text, some divisions. You'll see some things that are happening in Israel, and then you'll see some things that are happening simultaneously in Judah. So first of all, we look at Israel, and we start to see that there are going to be some altars built at Dan and Bethel. Now, Jeroboam has thought to himself, I don't know that these people will stay with me who have split off, because they're going to want to go back to Jerusalem, the place of worship, to offer their sacrifices. So instead, he makes a substitute available for them. He builds 2 golden calves. He puts one at Dan and one at Bethel, so that the people can conveniently worship this God who delivered them out of Egypt. And if you know the language there, or if you recognize the language, it's very similar to the language that was spoken by the people at the golden calf at the foot of Mount Sinai so many years earlier. They see these as the gods that delivered them out of Egypt. And so Jeroboam is trying to protect his inheritance, so to speak, as this new king. Now remember, Jeroboam had been told by Ahijah, the prophet, earlier that there were going to be 10 tribes split off, that he was going to be their king. And so this prophecy is coming true. But he was also told, just as Solomon had been told, if you will obey God, if you will heed his commands, God will really bless you and bless this nation of people. However, Jeroboam selfishly thinks about his own rule, his own power, and he does not follow the ways of God. He establishes idolatry in the land. He sets up shrines for the people to worship God, and everything he does is in opposition to God. This causes the Levites, who are now not being used as priests, because after all, Jeroboam is doing his own thing. He has appointed his own priests, who, by the way, are not from the tribe of Levi. So the Levites are wanting to get out of Dodge, so to speak. They flee back to the southern tribes of Judah. Along with them go some more Orthodox people who are still focused on worshiping God religiously and faithfully as they've been taught to do. And they see the things Jeroboam is doing, and they want no part of it. So they, along with the priests that are Levites, head south, and they leave Jeroboam and his kingdom. Now, in the meantime, in Israel, we see that there is a prophet of God who is going to issue a prophecy against the altar that Jeroboam has built. He speaks as though he's speaking to the altar, and he points his finger to the altar, cursing it because of what's going on, that Jeroboam has violated the will of God. Well, this makes Jeroboam angry, and so Jeroboam sticks out his finger, pointing to the prophet, wanting to curse him, and when he does, his hand is withered. He realizes this is the work of a man of God, and so he begs for forgiveness, he begs for healing, and his hand is restored. But this is just a sign that things are getting out of control for Jeroboam. Then we read this fascinating story about a prophet, this same prophet who had issued this curse against the altar of Jeroboam. And now Jeroboam, wanting to make things right with him, offers him some food to eat and some water to drink, and the prophet refuses. He says, I came on a mission that God sent me on, and he told me not to drink water or eat bread here, but to return home by a different way. So he refuses Jeroboam's attempt at hospitality. He's on his way back, and another prophet, now he's not described as a man of God, by the way, but another prophet says, why don't you come with me? I'm a prophet too, and I'll give you food and drink. Well, the first man of God, actually does listen to him. He buys into what is being sold, and he finds out later, unfortunately, that this was not a prophet of God. This was a false prophet. that ultimately leads to his death because he disobeyed the will of God. All of this is going on, and it's just kind of a hodgepodge of confusion, of idolatry, of rebellion, and everything that's happening as the nation of God divides is going downhill, going downhill, going downhill very, very quickly. This is what happens when a nation turns its back against God. And by the way, there ought to be some lessons here for us, not only as an individual, but as a nation. A nation who turns her back upon God is a nation that's going to be going downhill very quickly. Isn't it great to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.